Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we're going to be taking a look at Bug Infect for the modern format. So, for those of you guys that have never played a Infect deck, especially in Modern, we are quickly just going to talk about the way that this deck is actually going to function. So, we have a bunch of small and various little Infect creatures. With those creatures, we are going to be buffing them up and pumping them with a variety of different spells that are going to give a power and toughness boost to our creature for the turn. And we are going to be turning our dudes sideways, and we're going to try and race our opponent to 10 poison counters as quick as possible. Now, the Infect mechanic will read as such that a creature with Infect is going to deal damage in the form of -1/-1 counters to creatures or poison counters to our opponent. So the bigger our creature is for the turn, whenever it's dealing damage directly to our opponent, the more poison counters they're going to get at one time, and the closer we get to beating them with a much closer gap of damage that we have to deal, as opposed to having to race our opponent to 20 with any other normal aggro deck. The reason to play 3 colors in this deck, rather than just playing 2 colors where it would just be blue-green Infect, is that it allows us to play Plague Stinger in the main board, and it also allows us to play a few other cards in our sideboard that can kind of help us in a variety of different matchups and have a lot more overlap that will help us in the long run. Cards being like Abrupt Decay and even just Thoughtseize, for the sake of being able to pick away at combo decks hands or even control decks hands. Now, the first creature that we have here is Noble Hierarch. So Noble Hierarch is a 0/1 for 1 green with Exalted, and it taps for green, white, or blue to our mana pool. So our Noble Hierarch is able to kind of fix mana for us if we're a little bit lower on lands and maybe we just have a handful of spells. At the same time, the biggest benefit that Noble Hierarch provides to this type of a deck is the Exalted. So it is in and of itself a buff to our Infect creatures if they're attacking alone, which it really just depends on our board state and how we actually want to calculate our math and what's the most beneficial way of getting around dealing damage to our opponent. But the Exalted is kind of one of the biggest reasons to play Noble Hierarch within this deck, outside of even potentially being able to fix mana where maybe we don't have blue mana to play our Blighted Agent, or maybe we need another green that we don't have because we have like a Forest and an Inkmoth Nexus, and we want to play something like Vines of Vastwood with the kicker cost, but we don't have the appropriate mana. Noble Hierarch just kind of has multi-functions within this deck that whenever it comes together, it's kind of like a perfect card for this type of deck that you usually wouldn't expect to see within a aggro type shell. You wouldn't really expect to see a mana dork with Exalted within other types of decks, just because aggro decks are usually more focused and centered on just trying to get as much damage as possible with power in numbers, or usually just trying to attack with one creature over a bunch of turns and have burn spells or stuff like that. As far as Infect creatures are concerned, our first one is Glistener Elf. So it is a 1/1 for 1 green with Infect. Pretty plain and simple. There's not too much to this creature other than the fact that it's a 1-drop Infect creature, which is pretty sweet. If we're able to play it on turn 1, turn 2, if we have enough ways to pump it up, we are pretty much in the running to be able to just smash our opponent as quick as possible and potentially win on turn 3. Our next creature is Plague Stinger. So one of the reasons to actually be playing black here. The big benefit of Plague Stinger within this deck is the fact that it has flying. So the evasion is somewhat important in most matchups, just because maybe your opponent has ways to actually block your Glistener Elf. Well, maybe they don't have flying creatures in this case to be able to block the Plague Stinger. It is a 1/1 for 2, but it has flying and Infect as well. Our other Infect creature, and our last Infect creature as far as actual creature cards go, is Blighted Agent. So Blighted Agent is a 1/1 for 2, 1 and 1 blue, and it has Infect and is unblockable. So Blighted Agent is just kind of the best form of evasion that this deck actually has. If our Plague Stinger was unblockable as well, we would be absolutely golden. However, that's not the case. We can't be greedy with this type of a deck and expectations. We only have one creature that is perfectly unblockable, and that is our wonderful Blighted Agent. So that's kind of the easiest card that you can just proverbially put pants on in terms of our pump spells and just get in for damage. The biggest thing with this type of a deck is that you don't want to set yourself up to just get completely shut out and blown out because your opponent has like a Path to Exile or something like that. So that kind of bridges into what we're going to be doing with the variety of spells that we have that are going to manipulate our creatures, and also it's going to bridge into our sideboard and what we have prepared post game one for what we can expect our opponent to be siding in against us, and even things that could potentially just help us in the matchup and could stop what our opponent's trying to do in terms of like Splinter Twin comboing off before we can actually even get even relatively close to beating them. So the first spell that we have for our non-creature spells is Rancor. So Rancor is 1 green. It's going to enchant one of our creatures. The enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and has trample. So the trample is going to allow us to get past any big butts that our opponents have, so any high toughness creatures, or even just some small creatures that your opponents have that they can chump block with. So like Lingering Souls making 1/1s. It's a little bit awkward whenever you're not able to actually deal damage past those Lingering Soul tokens. So having trample is going to mean being able to actually connect and deal damage. Also, whenever Rancor is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return it to our owner's hand. So it just goes straight back to our hand, and then we can put it onto another one of our Infect creatures. If it's a matter of us putting Rancor on our creature, our opponent finds a way to get rid of our creature, and then we have to go about just kind of piecing things together in form of our actual aggressive strategy. Our next card is Giant Growth, so kind of the most vanilla pump spell that we have in this deck. It's pretty much the most iconic pump spell that there is in Magic. 1 green, and our creature is going to get +3/+3 until the end of the turn. Pretty plain and simple, just +3/+3, an extra 3 poison that we can deal for the turn, and it's pretty wonderful for the cost. We also have Groundswell. So Groundswell has essentially 2 different modes to it, and the fact that we're playing fetch lands and we're playing so many fetch lands in this deck helps the landfall mode of this card actually to be enabled very often or the most of the time. So for 1 green, it gives +2/+2 until the end of the turn to our creature. However, if a land came onto our play during this turn, landfall is going to trigger off, and it's going to give +4/+4 instead. So the difference between an extra 2 power usually is extremely monumental in most matchups, and could mean the difference between winning on like turn 2 or winning on turn 3, which turn 3 is really just where we're going to be winning our games. That's where the majority of our games are going to are pretty much going to either be like you either win on turn 3 or you win on turn 4. But either way, Groundswell is really awesome just because that dual modal aspect of the card, just being able to kind of manipulate things with your own fetch lands to give yourself a benefit, is really great. Next we have Vines of Vastwood. So Vines of Vastwood is 1 green. It has a kicker cost for 1 green as well. So target creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control during this turn, and if Vines of Vastwood was kicked, it gives +4/+4 until the end of the turn as well. So Vines of Vastwood is kind of like that protection card that is really easy to be able to manipulate situations and what your opponent's trying to do, whether it's like Lightning Bolt or Terminate, or I don't know, even just like your opponent trying to play Abrupt Decay on one of your creatures, because the fact of it being an illegal target is going to supersede the fact that Abrupt Decay can't be countered. So Vines of Vastwood is a really easy way out of a lot of different situations where your opponent would just kill off your creature most times. We also have Might of Old Krosa here in the deck. So it's another card like Groundswell where it's dual modal and it's entirely based on how you want to approach actually playing the card. But again, it's another card for 1 green. It's going to give our creature +2/+2 until the end of the turn at an instant speed. However, if you use the spell during your main phase, it's going to give the creature +4/+4 instead. So if you're able to start your main phase off with playing Might of Old Krosa, and your opponent wants to go and, like, I don't know, play like Lightning Bolt on your creature, and then you're able to follow it up with Vines of Vastwood, Vastwood or Apostle's Blessing, the next card that we're going to be talking about, then you're able to protect your creature ultimately and also get that +4/+4 benefit out of it. So really with Infect, it's all a matter of your order of spells and how you're actually going to conduct playing them, and ultimately just being able to protect yourself from being blown out and just dealing as much damage as possible without potentially threatening yourself to completely lose the game or completely lose all momentum that you have with your board state. So, Apostle's Blessing. Apostle's Blessing is our last card, and it's an instant speed spell for 1 and 1 Phyrexian white mana. So, with this card, because our deck can't actually produce white mana, we are going to be paying our 1 colorless mana of any form, and we're going to be paying 2 life. So, our target artifact or creature, which it's going to be creature in pretty much every sense, is going to gain protection from artifacts or from a color of our choice until the end of the turn. So the Apostle's Blessing can either be a way of us stopping our opponent from using a spell, colored spell from destroying our creature, or it can also give our creature protection from a given color so that our creature can attack past our opponent's blockers and be able to actually connect and deal the damage. So in the case of our opponent having like Lingering Souls tokens that are white and us having a Plague Stinger, maybe we can pump that Plague Stinger up as big as we possibly can and deal all the damage in one turn, but we need our Apostle's Blessing to be able to actually get past those creatures and be able to connect and deal the damage. Same thing with like Glistener Elf and creatures that are just ground creatures and could block it otherwise. So Apostle's Blessing is kind of dual modal because the protection allows you to do a little bit more and kind of breach a larger gap. It's kind of like the perfect card that you have in here because it's really good game one in a lot of different instances. So for the mana base, we have Inkmoth Nexus. So Inkmoth Nexus is in and of itself another Infect creature for us. It's a man land, so it taps for 1 colorless to our mana pool, but for 1 mana, our Inkmoth Nexus is going to become a 1/1 Blinkmoth artifact creature token with flying and Infect as well. So it'll essentially become like our Plague Stinger for that 1 white mana for the turn. So with Inkmoth Nexus, it kind of will dodge cards like Anger of the Gods or Wrath of God that our opponent could be playing in their main board. And ultimately, it's just kind of a easy way to get around what our opponent's doing as far as board wipes or sweepers are concerned. And it's just kind of like great because you have this land that in the early game you can develop a board state, your opponent wraths you, then you activate it, and then you just swing for lethal anyway because your opponent can't really deal with the Inkmoth as it is. We also have 2 Pendelhaven. So Pendelhaven is a card that I think a lot of people really forget that actually exists in this format, but it taps for 1 green to our mana pool, and we can also tap it to give target 1/1 creature +1/+2 until the end of the turn. So Pendelhaven is just really awesome because, well, all of our Infect creatures are really small. They're all 1/1s, so automatically our Pendelhaven can just pump them up just by us tapping it, and we can use that whenever we maybe don't have another pump spell that we can use, or maybe all we have are just protect spells in our hand and we have to find some way to deal a little bit more damage in our turn. The other really sweet thing is just the fact that it gives another toughness. So if our opponent has a 2/2 and we have a 1/1 Glistener Elf, we're able to attack, and our Glistener Elf is going to survive that trade just because it's a 2/3. So there's kind of some small stuff with Pendelhaven that just makes it a really perfect card for this deck, but just the biggest thing is we have 1/1s, and just getting some free pumps here and there is really awesome. For our fetch lands, we have a playset of Verdant Catacombs, and we have a playset of Misty Rainforest to be able to fetch for our corresponding dual lands here, or rather our shock lands. So for our shock lands, we have 2 Overgrown Tomb, and we have 2 Birthing Pod. And then for basics, we just have 2 basic forests. So we have a pretty even 40-20 split in between our creature and non-creature spells and our lands that we're actually playing for the deck, which 20 is pretty much exactly where you want to be with this type of a deck, where you don't get flooded and you don't see too few lands over the course of your entire games. Now for the sideboard, to discuss some of the implications of some of these sideboard cards and where you actually want to be siding them in. The first card that we have is Dispel. So Dispel is in the sideboard as of 2 of, and it counters target instant spell. So Dispel, I've found, is most useful up against decks that are extremely narrow in the things that they're going to be siding in against you, and are extremely narrow for what you can expect them to do. So in the case of like blue, white, red control, you can expect them to have Lightning Helix, Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, Electrolyze, and even just like Cryptic Command. Just being able to use Cryptic Command, like your opponent being able to use Cryptic Command to tap down your creatures if it goes down to like turn 4 and you're not able to connect and deal damage or win the game at that point. Being able to counter a Cryptic Command that could potentially keep you from attacking for that turn because they tap down your creatures is somewhat monumental in most cases. I couldn't mean the difference between winning or losing a game, but ultimately having that Dispel for cards like Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix, Terminate, things like that, it's just really useful. And most times you're going to be setting it in for the more narrow matchups where you can expect to see those things. Our next card is Nature's Claim. So for 1 green, destroy target artifact or enchantment, its controller gains 4 life. We really don't care at all about our opponent gaining life because we're pretty much just never going to win the game by getting our opponent to 0 life in general, because our creatures are Infect based, and you're really never going to win a game off of Noble Hierarch alone and it attacking with its own Exalted by itself every single turn. That's realistically never going to happen. Nature's Claim is going to be useful for matchups like Affinity for us because we want to get rid of their value artifacts, their cranial platings, and their other useful cards like Steel Overseer if it's a matter of power and numbers and our opponent has a bunch of like 0 drops that they can pump up, like their Ornithopters, and they can just give them a bunch of +1/+1 counters over the course of a bunch of turns. Nature's Claim is also useful against Splinter Twin because we can just get rid of the Splinter Twin once it connects and once it's put onto one of our opponent's creatures. However, you just have to be cautious of the order in which you're actually using the Nature's Claim, because once it's already on the Splinter Twin, then your opponent can respond to you actually using the Nature's Claim, and then they can go off and go infinite for the turn. So Nature's Claim in different matchups is all about being patient in how you're actually going to use it. But otherwise is pretty useful in a lot of different senses and a lot of different matchups for the threats that your opponent could be using against you, or they could even just be using proactively to try to win the game. We have 2 Dismember. So Dismember is a little bit more broad in how you can actually use it. It's useful for like the aggressive matchups, the combo matchups like Splinter Twin. It's just really kind of universal. Like if your opponent's playing value creatures that can either kind of piece things together for them to win the game, or they're going to use them over the course of a bunch of turns to smash you down, Dismember is probably a card that you want to be siding in, and it's probably something that you want to consider keeping for specific value cards that your opponent's trying to use or is trying to capitalize in the course of a game. We have 3 Abrupt Decay. So Abrupt Decay, again, has target matchups where it's more useful than other ones, but the Abrupt Decay for the most part has been really useful against like matchups like Jund, just because you get to side it in on games where you're not really going to be as aggressive. Like your game 2, if you're on the draw, you're not really going to be as aggressive, and your opponent has a much larger window of being able to kind of shut you down with cards like Liliana. So Abrupt Decay is really sweet against cards like Liliana of the Veil. It's good against cards like Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant as well. But it's also, again, good against decks like Affinity, just because the Affinity is so compact on the converted mana cost curve that they're actually running, and then you can shut them out of being able to use cards like Cranial Plating. So Abrupt Decay is a matter of paying attention to what the matchup you're actually playing is, what your opponent is playing in terms of converted mana cost permanence, and then being able to adjust accordingly based on whether you think you need the Abrupt Decay over any other given spells that you have in your deck that could not be as useful whenever you're bridging from game 1 to game 2. We have 3 Spellskites in our deck as well. So Spellskite is kind of the universally acceptable sideboard tech card for Infect. It's the card that you really just kind of expect to be in the sideboard a lot of the time, just because it's one of those easy cards that protects your creatures from being blown out by really stupid and cheap removal. Our Spellskite is 2 cost, it's a 0/4, and we can change the target of target spell or ability to Spellskite for 1 blue Phyrexian mana. So even if we have to pay life to keep one of our creatures alive and to keep our opponent from being able to destroy our creature, it's well worth it whenever we're siding in a card like Spellskite. Spellskite is also extremely useful for matchups where we want to be more defensive towards what our opponent's doing rather than what we're trying to do and what we're trying to protect. So in the case of Splinter Twin, we're able to redirect our opponent putting Splinter Twin on their creature, and we're able to put it on our own Spellskite for the turn instead. The same thing goes for matchups like Boggles, which their Abrupt Decay is useful for that, but Boggles doesn't really show up as often as it used to. However, it does pop up here and there, kind of like Infect does. So as far as our sideboard is concerned, it's pretty good against Boggles. But I digress. Spellskite is also good against decks like Boggles because they're going to be playing a bunch of enchantments and they're going to be suiting up their creatures with those enchantments. And if we can redirect what they're enchanting and we can put it on our Spellskite, we keep our opponent from actually being able to beat us in that sense. So Spellskite is great for being a defensive way for us to actually protect our creatures, but also keep our opponent, in some cases, from actually comboing off or winning the game otherwise. And then the last card that we have is Thoughtseize. So Thoughtseize is basically going to be for, like those combo decks that we don't want them to be able to combo off or get certain pieces in their hand or certain things going off. It's really great whenever you get to pick away at your opponent's hand. You get to see what they have and then just kind of strip them away. But also, Thoughtseize is going to allow you to shape your turns. It's a great card, and it's usually extremely skill intensive to actually play Thoughtseize, especially in the modern format, because you have to know what right cards to actually take from your opponent, but it also is going to give you valuable information of how you're going to conduct your turn for this turn, or maybe even your next given 1 or 2 turns that are going to come. And it can allow you to adjust appropriately based on what you think you need to do, how you want to play out your turns, and what you want your opponent to get rid of, or what you want them to counter, maybe because you don't have a way around that counter spell or something like that. But ultimately, it just gives you valuable information and allows you to strip away from your opponent anything valuable they may have. So that is our deck tech here for Bug Infect. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to see more deck tech coverage, please be sure to thumbs up that video and show some support. But until next time, guys, peace out.
If you guys want to keep up to date with everything that we have going on here at Absolute MTG, remember to hit that subscribe button, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter for all of your Magic the Gathering needs. Also, remember to check out our sponsors of the channel, MTG Madness and AVUgames.com. But as always, thank you guys for watching.